So thank you all for joining this call. Some of you know me. If you don't know me, I'm Shannon Banks. I'm based in the UK. Originally American, but I've lived in the UK for 17 years. I'm the managing director of a leadership development company called Be Leadership, and I'm a MALC. I'm a Master Action Learning Coach with WIAL, and I'm on the executive committee and board, global board for WIAL as well. I've used virtual action learning with my clients and with my team for many years. I spent a long time at Microsoft, and so I'm quite used to virtual working and have a long history of that. So I offered to run this, but I consider this very much a community sharing call, and we'll be using the chat pane for you to share your best practices and tips as well, because I have some experience with this, but that doesn't necessarily make me an expert in this. So I'm going to try to share some best practices, and I hope that you'll be able to add to that. And I want to thank Peter for moderating for us on this call. He will be managing the chat pane. If you don't have it open, I encourage you to open it and follow along there as we'll be using it. This call is also being recorded so that we can share it with our colleagues who are unable to make it now. I've muted you all. If there's anything urgent that you need to say, you can unmute yourself and say it. There will be time for moderated questions at the end of the call, and there will be times for other input throughout the call. I also just want to say thank you very much for prioritizing this during what I know is a really challenging time for all of us. I really appreciate the fact that you're spending time on this in that context. I hope that you and your families are all safe and well, and I hope they stay that way. And I know, at least for me, I'm very grateful that I have this skill set that I can use and offer and use myself in this context. It's very helpful to have ways that we can connect and work together virtually. So, so with that, I think we'll get started. So I wanted to start by getting a sense for how familiar this virtual scenario is for all of you. So if you can use the chat pane and just share first, just to get a general sense, and Peter, I'll have you kind of read out the general sentiment. How familiar are you with working virtually? Not doing action learning virtually, but just working virtually. And you maybe can do kind of 10 is I'm really, really familiar with it and I use it all the time, down to 1, I never use it at all. And Peter, if you can kind of give us a sense for the range on the call, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, the numbers coming in. There's a lot of 7 and 8s. There's a 4 or a 5. Thanks for being, you know, it's new for some of us. Somebody said, I used to be a 7, but I moved up to a 9 or a 10 in the last 2 weeks.
Excellent. Good learning. Well done. Okay, so then I would like some input on a second question. For this one, let's not use numbers, otherwise Peter might get super confused in the chat pane. But I'm interested in knowing how experienced you are using virtual action learning. And for this, let's say high, medium, and low. So I'm really experienced, I have lots of experience, I'm high, somewhat experienced, medium, and low. If you can add that to the chat pane, please.
Oh, this is impressive. They answer very fast, and so far 90% is low.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Christina from the Philippines says, I did 8 in the last week. Haha.
Yeah, so I know that some countries have really stepped up recently, and we've gotten some really positive feedback from people. Yeah, don't be scared. If you can do action learning in person, you can do action learning virtually, and hopefully these tips will help you. Thank you for that context. We'll go ahead and get started then. I've organized the way we're working on this call into 3 sections. The first section and topic I want to cover is setting up remote meetings. The second is creating connection virtually. And the third one is delivering virtual action learning. And the reason I'm sharing about all of these is that actually, in order to have a successful virtual action learning session, you really need all of these to go well. So we're going to spend time on all of these, and I appreciate your tips. It sounds like a lot of you have remote working experience, so you can bring those experiences into our conversation. So we're going to cover these 3 topics, and I want you to add your questions and tips in the chat pane. Ideally, if you can focus on the topic at hand, it'll make it easier for Peter to parse. And after each topic, the moderator, who is Peter, is going to share your tips with us. And at the end of the session, we're going to cover some Q&A. So that's how it'll work. And I will be reminding you of that as we go along. So we're going to start by talking about setting up remote meetings as you listen. So think specifically about this topic and add your tips and questions, if you would, in the chat box. So the first thing that I would suggest you think about as you're thinking about this is, where are your participants? So in a world where we don't all have to self-isolate, sometimes we run meetings where some of us are in one room and some of us are on the phone or calling in by video. And when we do that, it can be quite tricky. I spent many years at Microsoft calling into meetings where everyone else was sat around a conference table, and they used to go out and buy donuts before the call because it was their morning and it was my evening, and they would push the donuts around the table, and I could literally hear nothing other than the sound of donuts moving around the table, and it was very, very distracting. So that isn't ideal. Actually, in this world like this, where we're all calling in, it's much higher quality, believe it or not, and the engagement can be much more even. And so that can be really better. You can also run sessions where you have the facilitator or coach remote and everyone else is in a room. I know for a fact that some of us have done that using action learning, but I think other combinations get harder. We do need to think about time zones. Obviously, it gets more flexible. You can add different people from different locations into virtual action learning, but you get the complexity of time zones that you have to deal with. And then I think you also need to think about possible constraints. So some corporations have firewalls that don't allow certain tools. Some places have bandwidth issues that cause challenges. So thinking about all this in setting up your meeting will serve you well. Second question to consider is, what tool should we use? It feels like the world is gravitating towards Zoom. I've used Zoom for just over a year, and I find it hugely reliable and very nice to work with. It has a good feature set, but there are other tools out there, and some of your companies or your clients might prefer other tools. And what I would say is, try to get to know the tool that you'll be using before you get on your meeting, because they all have different features. Some have ways to raise your hand that are really easy. Most have chat. Some have side breakout rooms like Zoom does, polls, etc. So research and learn to use those. And I think in many situations, it's useful to set time aside for setup and also potentially for a little tutorial with your action learning members beforehand, because otherwise it can get distracting and people might not actually make use of everything available to them. Okay. Finally, around setting up your meeting, it's very useful to think in advance about what is needed for productive learning. I want to credit my colleague Liz Rushton, because she and I had a conversation about this. She's moved a lot of her work virtual. But it's useful to set really clear expectations up front in email or in a calendar invitation, so that people have time to prepare and can like get to know the tool if they don't know it, etc. Obviously, if you're doing meetings online, you need to think about how long you want people to sit in front of a computer. I was just on the phone with a client and he said that they had done a 3-day training for people all day long for 3 days with Cambridge University because they decided to shift it to virtual and they didn't change the format. And I was discussing flexing one of my programs and said that I didn't really want to do it that way. You need to think about how long people really want to sit and stare at a screen and whether that's even healthy. Most people would say, just like in person, 90 minutes to 120 minutes max before you give people a break, and maybe consider doing sessions over a longer period of time in our action learning context. Finding a workspace conducive to learning. I think at the moment we're all getting used to working from our home offices if we didn't already. And so I think this kind of makes sense. But when you're back in the like company environment, one of the biggest challenges is people decide they're going to sit in a noisy space. Well, you know, now we're not doing that, but like we're at a coffee shop and call in, and that can be really distracting for everyone else on the call. So making sure people really think about getting to a quiet space and really finding a location that's good is worth spending time on in advance. And then finally, deciding what support you need. Video is great. I think video can make for better engagement. I was a speaker for WBEX, which is a large online coaching conference with like thousands of people joining. And they are adamant that you use video as a presenter for that because it helps keep people engaged and focused. And I found the same in my smaller groups, but I have had some clients who don't want to use video. So you really want to talk to people and find out what works for them. And then in certain situations, think about whether you need a moderator. This is particularly true outside of action learning, but I think you could have someone designated on the action learning team. The team might decide that someone can capture good questions or something in a chat pane. Like you have some tools available to you that you don't have if you're in person. And so kind of a moderator is possible in the action learning context too, if the team wants that. So what I would love is for you to share now through Peter what has worked for you in this context. So hopefully you've been jotting some things down in the chat pane. If you haven't, you have a quick moment to do it now. And we'll be following the structure throughout. So at the end of each session, topic, I will pause and ask Peter to share out other tips that you have as a community. So Peter, can you share some ideas with us, please?
I just sent a message to everybody to say, so now is the time to either send your tips, things you've discovered in the last couple of weeks for some of you, so we can share them with everybody. So you can mix tips and questions. We'll do questions at the end. I already saw one question coming in, but for now we're gonna focus on the tips. So I'm gonna look at the chat box.
If they're as they're adding their tips, if you have a question there that's relevant to now, I can take it.
I'm gonna take the first one, Shannon. Can action learning work without video?
Yes. Absolutely, yes. I used to use it before video was very stable. And as I say, sometimes clients have asked to not use video. I think usually it's because they haven't had very good cameras available or something. But I did many hours of virtual action learning with phone only with one particular client, and it worked absolutely great. So right. I feel very confident that that's possible.
And another question, then we go to the tips. Would the moderator be the same as the observer that we're familiar with in action learning? Or how will the role of the moderator be different from the role of the observer?
So I don't typically have an observer in my action learning sessions outside of a calc, like a certification class. So I think it's kind of up to the group, but one thing groups could consider doing is having someone in the action learning group decide to capture good questions in the chat pane, just like groups might decide to have someone capture notes on a Flipboard. But that's what I was kind of thinking in terms of moderation. If for some reason you had a session where you had observers, then yes, absolutely, the observer could be documenting good questions in the chat pane as the session goes on. I have to admit that on my team calls, so I have a global team of associates, we do virtual action learning every other meeting, and we take turns coaching. And because the group is large, we have observers, and our observers do play that role. So perhaps, especially in this context, maybe there is justification for having observers who do that kind of thing.
Cool. So thank you for that, Shannon. There's a few more questions. We'll keep them at the end. So if you don't see your question answered now, don't panic. That's the Q&A at the end. I'm going to go quickly to the tips, Shannon. I'm going to read my short notes from them, and then you can build on that if you wish. So first of all, I have about 6 or 7 ideas. So in no particular order, somebody says a quick tutorial of the platform that's going to be used is interesting. Make sure people are familiar with the technology, a demo or something like that. Somebody said, take the opportunity of sending, for example, the WIAL videos. There's a few WIAL videos on the YouTube channel. Show them to the participants ahead of the session, so they kind of come a little bit more prepared, and you can probably have an easier startup. Very practical. We sometimes forget that in these days. Make sure everybody has pen and paper ready. Good one, because we're so technology based. Don't forget the good old pen and paper. Another very interesting one, if somebody's going to have a call using Wi-Fi, and another person in the same home is looking at streaming videos on Netflix, the Wi-Fi may be impacted. So the suggestion is, if somebody, if possible, where possible, ask people to prioritize, and that not too many other Wi-Fi using services are used. Somebody from the Philippines said that, actually interesting, groups of 7 to 8 people seem actually easier to manage virtually than when having them face to face all around a table. That's an interesting point. And then another, if we're going to use the company competencies or values, to make sure that it's sent ahead of time, a little bit like the introduction videos.
Great input.
So, exactly, very good things. So I'm going to give it back to you now, Shannon. Keep having the questions and tips coming, and I'll get back in when Shannon gives the microphone back to me.
Yeah, thank you. And if for some reason we don't get to all of the questions, we will keep them, and we'll try to somehow summarize them and provide some answers to those, but we'll get to as many as we can. All right, so the second topic is creating connection virtually. And again, this applies outside of action learning and within action learning, but it's really essential to a successful virtual action learning session. As before, please share tips and questions as we go in the chat box, and Peter will summarize. So the first question I would have you ask yourself in thinking about creating connection virtually is, how can I create a safe space for people? So we know that we need to do this in person. It's, I would argue, even more important virtually to help build kind of team psychological safety in a virtual space, in a virtual world. There are quite a few different ways one can do this, but a couple thoughts that I wanted to particularly stress were these. So one is, I always find it helpful to do some kind of check-in before the action learning gets started, or frankly, before any of my virtual meetings get started. So there are many ways that you can do this. A few ideas are having everyone say one word on how they're feeling. We started this session with a poll for people who joined early, which was around how are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10. So you can even use the tech and do a poll if you want to do a check-in, or you can just ask people if it's a smaller group. Some of my clients use a traffic light check-in where they say, are you feeling red, amber, or green? And you're allowed to elaborate on the context for that, to just share how you feel. And for example, on my committee meetings for the WIAL board, we do a 2 to 3 minute check-in per person. Usually those are open, and I say what has been going on for you since the last time we met. But you also can do that in a directed way. So sometimes on my team meetings, I'll say, what have you learned since the last time we were together, as a way to check in. So you can ask a specific question instead of a more open question. The other thing around virtual that's worth calling out in this safe space area is around silence and allowing for silence, especially if you're doing something like action learning. Remembering that, well, and other team meetings, frankly, remembering that we have different personality preferences, and like in the in-person meetings, some personalities might be really quick to jump in and other people might need some more time and space. So giving that time is really essential in this kind of virtual world. The second thing to think about in creating connection is, how do I want to show up? Again, this isn't unique to virtual, but I think sometimes we get onto virtual and suddenly feel like we can't be ourselves. It's really important that you are your authentic self. It doesn't have to be all serious. It can be fun and jokey if you want to be fun and jokey, or it can be serious and you can share, serious things. The most important thing is that you're just really yourself, even though you're not sitting in the same room with people. Thinking about your body language is important. Sometimes people misread body language on the phone, and sometimes, if you think about email as an extreme case, it's really difficult to understand what people are saying, and unfortunately some of that carries through when you're not sitting together. So just think about your body language and know where your camera is. You'll see I'm mostly looking at you. I know where my camera is, and in this call it's easy for me to focus on my camera because I can't look at all of you because there are 70 of you on the call, so I can't focus on that. It gets harder, as you guys probably know, when you're one-to-one, because you're looking at this other person's picture down here and then you're not looking at your camera. So I always try to align my person that I'm talking to underneath my camera as much as possible. So that allows me to look at them, but also look in the camera so that I'm not looking down at my picture down here. So that's a tip. And then remember, you are on video. One of us shared a video of a video conference where someone forgot they were on video and actually took their laptop into the bathroom with them. You do not want to be doing that kind of thing. Unfortunately, because in this world we use a lot of, we watch a lot of YouTube videos. If you're on a conference call, you could potentially forget that everyone can see you. So don't do that. Remember, you're on video. Okay, finally in this section, what will help increase focus and engagement? This is not a perfect example of that. I'm trying to keep you engaged through the chat pane. It gets harder with larger numbers, but you don't want people to be multitasking ideally, and that is easily done, especially in this kind of environment where everyone is struggling to focus because we have so many concerns on our mind, frankly, and news is coming in every second and it's super distracting. So here are some ideas for that. I mean, one is keeping videos on, especially with an action learning group where you can see everybody. It does help. Making sure the session's interactive in some way. Even in a big group, you can do something that's interactive and involve people. There's research to say that if you write things down, you stay more engaged. Even if you're doodling, actually, So encouraging people to write down notes physically with their pen and their paper that you guys reminded me are important actually can help people stay engaged. And then finally, actually surfacing this and the challenge of this. I always say in action learning, best as a coach to surface the potential challenges or the real challenges that you see. So surfacing this and agreeing norms around it. And some of those norms are often like closing other applications, turning off your phone, you know, making sure notifications aren't popping up, that kind of stuff. Okay. I'm sure you guys have other ideas, which I look forward to seeing. So, Peter, can you once again share what the community have contributed, please?
Yes, I will. So thank you. And by the way, we forgot, we started, you said, Shannon said, oh, I hope we would be at 49, and you probably haven't had time to look. We're at 71 right now. So that's really cool. Great audience. We can go up to 100. The maximum for the Zoom is 100. So if you're still joining, you're still welcome. So here we go. Tips. I want to just clarify, please guys, now is the time for your tips, because I've had a few comments, or sorry, questions rather. Somebody mentioned earlier, and I want to clarify, when we said sharing the video to explain people what action learning is about, the idea is not to share the video during the call, but actually send it up front, I don't know, a day before, 2 days before. So people, that was the idea. So maybe my explanations were not clear. So that's it. Shanna, I want to, hang on. Because we're going to, the third sec, I saw a few questions specifically about action learning and interventions. Okay. That's actually part 3 of our call that we're going to start in a few minutes. Yep.
Any other tips?
Can I ask a question though? What is the best practice when the camera is off? So somebody asked earlier, can we do virtual action learning without video? The answer is yes, but then what would be the challenges, or what is the best practice when there's actually no video, or some people don't have a video?
Okay, so I'll cover, and please, whoever asked that, or Peter, remind me if I don't cover it thoroughly in the next section. I'll cover it in the next section for things where I'm describing things that rely on video. I'll talk about ways to do it without, specific to action learning practice. I think if video is off in a general team meeting, it's just more important to check in with people. So if you think about a team meeting without action learning, pausing and checking how we're doing as a group is something you can still bring in. And I would argue is made more important if you can't see each other and you don't really know how engaged people are, or you can't see facial expressions to see how people are feeling. So I would think about what you do as an action learning coach and use that outside the action learning context if you're running virtual meetings or programs that aren't action learning. In terms of action learning, I'll get to that in a second.
Exactly. And I have a brilliant tip from Christina from the Philippines. I'm going to read it out. Maximize the use of the platform for interaction. Use polls, chat, raise hands, whiteboard, etc. However, use only maximum 3 tools so it doesn't get too wild. Because if it's all over the place, then probably people will be struggling to follow. And actually, I can confirm that, Shannon, before I get your thoughts on that. For me, I'm monitoring the chat box. I cannot follow most of what you're talking, and vice versa. You would not be able to monitor the chat box. So be careful with using all these tools or elements within the tools, because it can be a bit overwhelming for the coach. Of course, we are 70 people today. That's not the case of an action learning session.
No, but that is true. And in fact, as we were designing this session, we talked about using the whiteboard in addition to the text pane for certain things, and decided actually, no, we're just going to use the chat pane today. So I think that is worth consideration. And I think it's a really good tip from Christina. So thank you.
There you go. And another tip, not high tech at all. Another one from Christina is you can also do this or that.
Yeah, so on a video, can you guys see Peter? So thumbs up, thumbs down. Yes. On video, you can do that. Yes, yeah.
For those who don't see me, so just a normal thumbs up using your hand.
Yes.
Shannon, maybe another question I want to throw in here. Maybe the person who's, I think it fits in what we're talking about. I'll get to the other comment in a minute. Is Zoom, I'm new to the technology somebody shared some while ago. Is Zoom difficult to use or is it quite intuitive?
Like any tool, you have to get to know where things are. I think it's quite intuitive if you're familiar with any kind of video conferencing tool. The thing that I found not intuitive, which I'm going to admit, is if you are a host. So I have a paid Zoom account. WIAL has a paid Zoom account. So I'm talking about that. But I actually think these features are available for non-paid accounts as well. By default, my host features were not visible. So as a host, I can create a poll, I can create a breakout room in Zoom, but I didn't see the user interface to do that by default. I had to go into the website, zoom.com, into my settings and turn those on. So be aware, and this probably applies with a lot of the tools, that some of the features may not be turned on by default, and you can make more use of the tool if you explore it really thoroughly and like learn what it can do for you. Okay.
Final question before I give it back to you, Shannon. We have a pizza man amongst these 71 participants who asked, what is a whiteboard?
Okay. So in Zoom, you can share a different number of different things. I think I will share a whiteboard like this. You can share a whiteboard, and then you can have people type and draw on this. So feel free, have a go. I'll see how many people can type on this whiteboard. Can you guys type on that whiteboard? As I'm doing live demos, I hope you can. Can you see it?
I think we can see it. I'm trying to
type. Oh yeah, I see. Hi, Shannon. I see. Hi, Shannon. Hello from the Philippines. There we go. So I don't know what the lag is with this many people, but this is a feature that works really well.
Okay, Shannon, I'm going to interrupt. Apparently somebody says you need to share control. Would that be the reason that some
yeah, okay.
Type?
I think that the people who can type probably are logged in maybe as WIAL rep and they're not hosting. So, but this is easily solved. You guys can see it. Oh, I see no need. So some of you are getting it. I'm not quite sure, but it's very easy. Oh, and he's saying you don't need. So you guys can type on this. That's good. So yeah, here we go. It says just go to view options and choose annotate. There you go.
Thank you. Now that's a good tip. So those of you who said I cannot access, they have the Philippines have been playing around with Zoom for a week. So go to the view options and choose annotate, and then you should be able to type.
Yep, we got okay, got it. We got some people drawing. Maybe we'll get some artists doing some nice stuff. All right, and we even got hearts. Amazing.
I think now they know what a whiteboard is.
Yeah, we got it, and we got stamping going on. All right, so I'm going to close that whiteboard. It's very beautiful, but I'm going to close it now. I won't save it, even though it's got some amazing art on it. So I hope I'm closing this whiteboard. It's still here. All right, there we go. I'm just going to go back and share my, I think I've lost my share. So I'm just going to go back and share my PowerPoint, and we'll go back in. All right. Everybody can see the PowerPoint, I think. What we'll do now is we'll move on to the next topic, which is actually about action learning specifically. Okay, so as I said at the start, these all need to come together for you to have a successful session. So as before, add your thoughts in the chat box. The first thing I want to talk about here is how might I need to coach differently? Everyone on this call is an experienced action learning coach. So the first thing I want to say about virtual action learning is to trust the process and remember that the script works. It works in person and it works virtually. And actually, if you have less experience as a coach, I've had a lot of people say they prefer virtual because they can have their written notes in front of them and they can really have the like cheat sheets that they need all spread out in front of them so that they can support them. So trust the script is the first thing I would say. The second thing I would re-stress is to spend a bit more time up front around norms. We do norming anyway in action learning coaching, but I think especially in this context, it's very worth making time for. And the third thing that I would talk about in this little topic is body language. So if you're using video, one of the things that can be a bit challenging as a coach when you're virtual is entering and exiting without interrupting the flow. And so one way that we've learned that can be really helpful for the participants, just like when you're sat at a table, is to make your entrances and exits quite deliberate and extreme. So if you're all working and I lean in here like this, I make my face really big and obnoxious, it helps people know that I want to come in. And then if I actually sit back while they're working a little bit and make my notes, just like I would scoot away from the table, then I can help people understand that I don't need to intervene at that moment. Now, because people have asked the difference without video, I'd say without video, I think it's a norm to set up front, to say, to remind people, yes, I have the authority to intervene as a coach, and that might be a little bit more difficult for me to do because we're on the phone. So I will do my best to not interrupt a question, and if I do, you know, I'm really there to support you, and I'm doing the best I can to get in at an appropriate moment. So if you almost try to preempt their worries about that, they will be more supportive of your interventions on the phone. And then just as in person, listen for the best possible moment to come in and try not to intervene after a question before it's answered, okay? All right, second is how do I best manage interventions? So these are specific interventions that I have found are slightly different when I'm doing virtual action learning. So first we have the leadership skills. Now, if you're virtual, you do not have a physical whiteboard to write these on. So people in the community, in our community, have really shared two practices that are typical for this. One is to use the whiteboard that we just experimented with to write down leadership skills. And then possibly leave that whiteboard up because it doesn't hurt if you don't have slides, and we don't in action learning, so maybe leave that up. Or some people capture leadership skills in the chat pane. And we have them there, and you can always keep that chat pane up and you can see them there. A third idea that actually I just remembered that I've done once, if everyone is on video, is to have like a name tag with your leadership skill on it, like create a tag, a physical thing, so that you can see the person and their leadership skill on video. Those are the ideas. I'm sure there are others, and I look forward to hearing them. So type away if you have ideas, put them in the chat pane for us. Second thing is to be very clear to whom your question is directed. So this is something I stress when I teach calc anyway, but it's even more important in this context. So you will, as a coach, probably have written down the names of people in your group, or you'll see all the pictures in a gallery view. You need to call out people one at a time. Peter, you know, blah, Tuan, blah. If you want everyone to answer, you need to be really specific who you're asking. If you just ask a general question and expect people to come in, they will talk all over each other. In writing the problem, I used to find it super challenging to know when they're done because you can't really see very well. This is particularly when I was doing phone only, so I'll talk about that. But on video, what I usually do is say, it's a bit hard for me to tell if you're finished, so please can you just say, I'm done, or I'm ready when you're ready, and or ask them to raise their hand when they're done and just, you know, give them a nod or say, okay, Peter, okay, Shannon, I see. If you're on the phone, I ask people to say that they're done when they're done. So I just say, when, you know, I can't see you, I can't tell if you're done writing. When you finished writing, say I'm done. And you know, it's harder to control, but the more firm you are that people should read what they have written. I am going to ask you to read what you have written. So please write a concise statement. That will really help. Okay, finally, if you're asking the team a question, there have been some tips here from our community. Consider potentially either doing a roll call, which effectively means you ask everyone at some point, or calling on someone, maybe because they've been less engaged or whatever, but tell them that I'm going to be calling on you, which I might not normally do, but pass is a perfectly fine answer. You do not have to answer if you don't have an answer. So you could either go around and give everyone a chance if that's a question that's appropriate for that, and let them pass if they don't have a response, or you can call on someone specifically and also let them pass, all right? The thing is, it's about getting engagement and just making sure, especially in this context, that everyone has an opportunity. I'm hearing a couple people off mute. If you can mute when you're not needing to be, like if you can mute if you don't need to be off mute, please do. Is that a question? I think if someone can maybe put your question in the pane.
Is it in the chat box? And can you mute everybody, Shannon? Because there's indeed background noise now.
Yeah, I'm trying. Hang on 1 second. I'm gonna mute you all. All right, hopefully that's worked. All right, sorry about that. All right, so the final thing here I wanted to try to support you with is common scenarios that you might encounter in a virtual action learning session. So the first one is possible in any session, but becomes more likely in a virtual action learning session, and unfortunately becomes even more likely in today's environment where people might be getting sick and not be able to participate, or have family that are sick and need to support them. So I think it's very important to have a conversation up front. I'm a big advocate of letting the team decide the right approach. So it's about asking the question, how do we want to handle it? If people are unable to attend future sessions or need to drop out for reasons that are important. So the reason I raise this particularly in virtual sessions is that they're more likely to run over time. And anytime you get an action learning set that's run over multiple sessions over a period of weeks, there's a greater chance that someone can't join one. So again, I don't have an answer for what the right solution is. I think you leave that to the group, but I think it's important to ask the question and set a norm, have the group set a norm. The second common scenario is technology. The first thing I'd say is, well, don't stress too much about that. You've seen some tech issues here. Tech issues happen all the time. You just kind of have to go with the flow and practice agility and figure out a way through. But I do appreciate that, especially in some households, some countries, we are reaching the limits of our Wi-Fi and data abilities. And so you may indeed face technology issues. So again, be prepared that you might, and think about how you might want to approach those and have a conversation with the team on how they want to. The third is energy levels. I think for this, it's about checking in more often on how people are doing, what is our energy, what can we do to increase our energy, and keeping everyone engaged. And then finally, as I mentioned, it's harder to read people's feelings. If you're sitting around a table and someone disengages and leans back and really just, you can tell they're frustrated, you can surface that. It's a bit more difficult, particularly on the phone. So again, these scenarios are mostly about surfacing them, asking more questions about how we're doing as a group, and potentially trying to set more upfront norms. All right, so with that, I'll have Peter share some tips for us. If you could, please mute. I'm struggling
Okay,
to
guys,
find.
there's a lot of background noise now, so try to mute yourself if you're not muted.
I'll mute everyone and then I'll let you mute yourself, Peter. So I'm muting everyone again because it's too loud otherwise. Sorry. Please put your questions in the chat pane. And Peter is going to share with us your tips for this segment.
Excellent. Thank you. A lot came in. Now, just if you keep typing now, it means I won't be able to, I can't read my handwriting and then go back at the chat pane. So pause the chat pane for a minute. A lot of tips here before. Excellent point. Actually, if you can watch my video, my image, you see that my name, I added something behind my name. I'm not sure if you can see that if you take a big enough view of my video, because that was a tip from the Philippines. Ask people to add the competency, the leadership skill they're actually practicing. Brilliant idea. So you can just see Peter is practicing moderating, and maybe Shannon is practicing, I don't know. And so instead of needing to, have a board somewhere, you can immediately be remembered. And of course, there's not 70 people, there's only 7 or 8. So that's a great tip. Thank you for that. Somebody said, if as a coach, I want to call the team for their attention, I'm going to flash a big colorful sheet of paper. And somebody kind of separately said, maybe if the coach wants to call the attention of the crowd, should they maybe have a ding, like a sound signal? That was kind of formulated as a question.
And some tools actually, sorry, Peter, to interrupt, some tools actually have a ding that you can like ring a bell. I've worked with tools in the past that have that, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, there was a few more questions about, what happens if, we talked about that earlier, what happens if technology, if the coach gets cut out. Well, it's one of the things you need to think about, and then somebody else answered. That's the kind of norms we need to think about before we start the session, including if the coach gets cut out. So these are more tips. Somebody else, the raise hand feature in Zoom. Now, we are not all experts in Zoom, guys, but there is a feature where you can raise your hand, not like this, not me raising my hand, but basically saying in the chat box that you're raising your hand. You can do that when you finish to write your problem statement. You can do that when you want to call the coach's attention. So explore that, okay? These are tips that I've seen so far. I'm going to answer the questions at the same time. Somebody asked, is it okay to ding? Let me give the official WIAL answer. There's no learning without action, and no action without learning. So I would say try and see what happens. And yes, I will also try to save the chat notes and all these questions and share them with you, as we will save this whole recording. So these were the tips, Shannon. I'm going to go.
Wonderful. Yeah, let's move on to questions because we have about 10 more minutes. And so I'm happy to take questions.
Can I suggest that you stop screen sharing so we can all see everybody? That's kind of cool. Thanks, by the way, for making all these slides. I want to thank Shannon because before we forget about that, because she's been working very hard on that. So really appreciate it, Shannon. I think we're all learning from it. This is a bit of generic. No. First, I have a specific question. Somebody asked some while ago, and maybe you addressed it partly, Shannon, what you talked in the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes. How can we make the intervention? And then somebody had the same question, but being more specific, how do we intervene since Zoom is best to speak one at a time? That was the question, Shannon.
So, so how can we intervene when Zoom is best to speak one at a time? I mean, I think it's not that different from being in a meeting, in my view, especially if you're not in such a huge group. Clearly, if we all tried to figure out when to intervene, it'd be a nightmare. But if you have a group that's the size of an action learning group, you, as the coach, need to wait for a moment of silence and just get in confidently, possibly using some of these tips some of your peers have suggested here. I haven't found it to be that horrible. You might step on each other a little more than normal, but it's okay. Did I answer that question?
We'll see if people have maybe follow-up questions. So by the way, guys, now is the time, and I do apologize if I didn't capture your question or idea. If for some reason I skipped it, please type it again now, or if you have a follow-up question on what Shannon just said, please do so now. Somebody said, kind of a technical question, somebody said, I tried to annotate when we were playing with the whiteboard. It was clear it worked for many people, but somebody said, I cannot find the feature annotate. Now, we're not here as experts for Zoom, so I would suggest take a note of that. I'm sure you can find stuff like that on, YouTube or something. There's so many things out there. I think all of us were kind of discovering as we go, right? Shannon, something to add on that?
Yeah, no, I think actually, no matter what tool you use, you'll be surprised at the features that it probably has that you didn't realize. So my advice there is to just do search on YouTube, and there are videos for everything. And in fact, Zoom support has loads and loads and loads of videos. They're really good about it.
Cool. I have two more big questions, Shannon. And Amanda, I haven't forgotten you because it's right here on my list. Amanda had asked, and she asked it again because I haven't answered it. You haven't answered it. When would you use breakout rooms? And she's very specific. Would that be when the team gets to the solution phase, or, which I think the answer will be yes, but I'll let you answer more, or would it be for multi-group programs?
So breakout rooms. So first of all, for those of you who don't know, Zoom has an ability to break out into breakout rooms. I think both of those are places that you could consider using breakout rooms. So if you pause your action learning to take action, you might use breakout rooms for those actions. You might, in solutioning, decide to break into smaller groups and then come back together. You might have a program that you're running where you want to do the initial introduction to action learning with all of you, and then break into smaller action learning groups, and then have moments where you come back together, and you could use breakout rooms for that. For those of you who might be certified to a level to teach the virtual action learning certification courses, I talked to a client this morning about an interest in certifying 10 people, and we talked about using breakout rooms for that. So they would have, so there would be 2 coaches doing shadow coaching, 2 breakout rooms, and then coming back together. So I think there are a lot of opportunities with breakout rooms, and I would consider those.
Cool. 2 more questions, Shannon. The first one, 2 people asked it sometime way back and then just again now. The first person asked, can participants talk or only use the chat box? And I think the answer will be quite easy. But then somebody else said, have you ever had a situation where people prefer to type in the chat box rather than actually verbally answer and participate?
No, that's an interesting question. And maybe there's an out-of-the-box idea there that I haven't fully thought through. But normally we would talk, and I would enjoy it much more if you guys could talk, but it's just too many people to allow for that at the moment. So in an action learning group, though, it's fine. And I think from Christina's comment, I agree with her, 7 to 8, it still works. Just have to leave enough time to do the leadership skills and all that. But I think just treat it as if you're around the table together and let people talk. Having said that, maybe there's something in the typing approach that we haven't considered. So, use this as a moment to be creative. Let us know how that goes.
Exactly. Thanks, Shannon. A very good question to end a typical action learning question, and of course a difficult one. What has been your biggest challenge with virtual?
Well, I'll tell you what I thought it would be, and I didn't end up seeing this. And I'll try to think if I've actually had a challenge that I felt really was insurmountable. I thought I would struggle doing virtual action learning with a group I had never met ever in person. And I had a client early on in using virtual action learning where I had met the group, and then we had gone off to do virtual action learning over a period of months, and then we were coming back together. And I ended up inheriting another group that had a coach who fell ill, and he wasn't using the WIAL method. This was a program where there was a lot of different action learning going on, and some of it was WIAL and some of it wasn't. And so I inherited this group. I had never met them. They had never even heard of WIAL action learning. And in fact, they'd been using something else altogether. I don't even know what. And they were actually really demoralized as a group. They were not in a good place. And I wrote to them, sent them an email, described the WIAL method. I said, I'm going to be using this method. It's probably different from what you've experienced. I know you've had a rough ride so far. We're going to work on making it better. And came in, never had met them. And it was only phone. This was a number of years ago. And it was totally fine. So I think the reason it was okay was I tried to really see where they were coming from and set it up in an understanding way. I was really clear with my boundaries. I stayed really true to the script. I had confidence to just tell them, this is what we're doing. I know you did something different, but it didn't go that well, and this is going to go better. And it really worked. I got such good feedback. So I think that was the challenge I thought I would have, and I think it could have been a challenge, actually. So I think if you're not able to ever meet people and you have to come together virtually, really think about what you can do to create that connection so that they come together and really bond as a group.
Okay. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to wrap up here because we've reached the top of the hour. I want all of us, this is a great experience. Look at us, we're 70 or so WIAL folks from all around the world. And in a few hours, if you want to do it again, well, it's going to be 1 a.m. Bangkok time. So figure it out if you want to join the other session. But I want all of us to give a silent and virtual, but not less well-intended round of applause to Shannon Banks from the UK.
Thank you. Thank you all for the amazing input. It was really helpful. It's really great to see us sharing as a community. And I want to wish you all health for you and your families. Please stay safe and well.
And as we've said earlier, all this has been recorded and will be shared in the usual WIAL channels. Take care, everybody. Thank you again, Shannon.